Confucius in 90 Minutes by Paul Strathern. Introduction. Confucius knew all about life, but we know very little about his life. This leaves us at rather a loss when judging him personally. He told us how to behave, but we can't find out precisely what he was up to. Confucius is a close contender for the most influential man in history, so we're lucky that his philosophy was nebulous and rather boring. His collection of well-meaning platitudes, quaint maxims, and quasi-enigmatic anecdotes combined to produce an ideal philosophy for civil servants. And this was precisely Confucius's intention. Unlike other sages, he had no wish to see his disciples become penniless vagabonds, roaming the highways and byways in a state of unemployable enlightenment. His aim was to turn his pupils into good government officials, and in this he succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. For more than 2,000 years his teaching provided rules of conduct and spiritual fodder for the clerks, schoolmasters, ministers, and administrators amidst the stultifying conformity of the Chinese Empire. This was the empire that gave us the curse, "May you live in interesting times." In Confucian China, boredom was bliss. Not surprising when you consider the alternatives. If you stepped out of line, committing even a minor offense, you were lucky if you got away with castration. The court of many an irascible Chinese ruler sounded as if it was run by a bevy of schoolchildren. Until the Communist Revolution of 1949, Confucianism was almost synonymous with the Chinese way of life. During the Mao era in mainland China, Confucianism was regarded with deep ambivalence. Confucius himself was reviled as one of the class of landlords and capitalists. In fact, he qualified for neither of these exalted categories. Confucius spent most of his life unemployed, was always short of money, and had no estate. During the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, the Red Guards attempted to purge the last remnants of Confucianism from Chinese thought. Even so, Chairman Mao continued on occasion to encourage his comrades with sayings by Confucius. Both of these latter facts point to a strong undercurrent of Confucianism in Chinese thought, which persisted beneath the veneer of Marxism. On the other hand, Confucianism remained and remains very much alive throughout the Chinese diaspora, from Taiwan to Chinatowns the world over. The sayings of Confucius succeed from one generation to the next, his name having achieved a cultural centrality similar to Shakespeare for the English or Goethe for the Germans. Yet, surprisingly, Confucius himself was a failure. Or so he thought, and who are we to contradict such a wise man? Confucius considered that he had not succeeded in life and died a disappointed man. Confucius's life and works. Confucius is the Latinized form of Kangfutsu, which means the Master Kung. He was born in the 6th century BC, and lived for the most part in the north-central coastal region of China. The 6th century BC was arguably the most significant in human evolution since the first caveman inadvertently set fire to his home. Beside witnessing the birth of Confucius, this century also saw the founding of Taoism, the birth of Buddha, and the inception of Greek philosophy. Why these vital intellectual events should have taken place just then, for the most part in civilizations that were in disparate states of development and had no contact with each other, remains a mystery. Some of the solutions put forward, visits from alien spaceships, exceptional activity on the surface of the sun, brain diseases, etc., would suggest that our mental development has not progressed much since this era. Confucius was born in 551 BC, in the feudal state of Lu, which now forms part of the north-central coastal province of Shantung. He came from a long line of impoverished nobility, and is said to have been directly descended from the rulers of the Qin Dynasty. This was China's earliest dynasty, which lasted more than 600 years, from the 18th to the 12th century BC. It was said that the people produced azure pots painted with beautiful flowers, and used pink cowrie shells as currency. According to legend, its inhabitants were credited with inventing Chinese writing so that they could communicate with their ancestors by means of messages carved on tortoise shells. Naturally, such enchanting nonsense was dismissed by serious historians until recent archaeological discoveries confirmed the existence and lifestyle of just such a dynasty during the 2nd millennium BC. But unfortunately, no messages to early members of Confucius's family have yet been discovered among the tortoise-shell tomes. What we do know is that Confucius's father was a minor military official and was 70 at the time of Confucius's birth. When Confucius was 3, his father died, and he was brought up by his mother. Curiously, of the dozen or so figures who founded the world's great philosophies and religions, a large majority were brought up in single-parent families. Late in life, Confucius was to remember, "When I was 15, I was only interested in studying." This was the bedrock of his life, which he would later see as having been divided into distinct stages. When I was 30, I began my life. At 40, I was self-assured. At 50, I understood my place in the vast scheme of things. At 60, I learned to give up arguing. And now, at 70, I can do whatever I like without disrupting my life. How much of this is genuine spiritual autobiography, and how much is Confucius's variant on traditional wisdom concerning the ages of man, it's difficult to say. Either way, it contains little of personal particularity, or what the modern reader would consider a life. Apart from Confucius's self-proclaimed love of learning, little is known of his early years. Little, that is, apart from the usual collection of unlikely stories that accumulate around any such transcendent figure. Birds charmed from trees, an uncle's favourite dog brought back to life, comets, etc. By now, the 600-year-old Qin Dynasty, which had brought civilization to China, was beginning to fall apart. This was a feudal period, with vassal city-states switching allegiances and going to war almost at will. The warlords lived as warlords have always lived, massacre, famine, orgy, and the rest of the population merely made up the numbers so that their masters would not be reduced to less populous activities, murder, starvation, depravity. Human misery was rife on the traditional Oriental scale, not witnessed since the Communist Revolution, which nonetheless managed to retain a few of the traditional miseries. This grounding in everyday horrors had a profound effect upon young Confucius. It was to give a toughness and practicality to his thinking which it seldom lost. Confucius quickly saw that if such untold suffering was to cease, the whole notion of society would have to change. A society ought to work for the benefit of all its members, rather than be used merely as a pretext for the excesses of its rulers. Confucius was the first to formulate this oft-ignored cliché. Not until 200 years later did the ancient Greeks start discussing this point. But because they discussed it, they quickly developed a sophisticated abstract notion of justice. Confucius didn't have the opportunity to discuss such matters during his formative years, so his thoughts remained practical. He decided that the notion of society would have to change, but not society itself. The ruler must rule, and the administrator carry out his duties as surely as the father must be a father to his son. The revolution he eventually taught was one of attitude and behavior. We must each strive to fulfill our role as virtuously as possible. But Confucius did make pronouncements on this and related subjects which allowed his followers much room for interpretation. For example, if a theory spreads, it is because heaven wills it. It is difficult to be a ruler, yet it is not easy to be a subject either. Men of integrity do things differently. Not to act when justice commands is cowardice. This wide, quasi-cohesive lack of logic that characterized Confucius's teaching was to prove Confucianism's great strength. In the end, you could never prove it entirely wrong, and if you looked hard enough, you could find something in it to prove almost anything right. Confucianism was to share this strength with the Bible, as well as the sacred texts of most lasting creeds. At 18, Confucius married and had a son called Liu, which means large carp. Liu was to prove a disappointment to his illustrious father, and never became the big fish Confucius had hoped for. Confucius was poor, and to make